Just in line.
We are now live, and this is the moment that you've all been waiting for. Paul's promised workshop. But there is a report coming to us to talk about the Info annual general charge.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is a decision that needs to be made to enable us to complete the long-term planning process. And really what we're asking the council to do today is adopt appropriate levels of fixed components of the general rate, which is called the new annual general charge, and a fixed targeted rate for the community facilities rate. So there are some things that I'll really briefly run through them because I know you love looking at the numbers and seeing it all change, so I'm going to get into that. This model, we've shrunk down the number of samples, just that other page that was available was just way too busy and it's difficult to look at and see, but these are samples. It's almost a subset of the sample properties, so these are on the sample properties spreadsheet. It does include all of the deliberation decisions.
It does?
It does. So this is after, and if you somewhat, makes a change. You remember us going through that table. So all those decisions there feed into the sample property changes here. So we've incorporated that. I have set the UAGC as a starting point at the same dollar value as what we went out and consulted on. And that's why if you look at the spreadsheet there, the UAGC is still at slightly above 30%. You get the opportunity to change the fixed component and that will impact that. I guess the question is, why is there a 30% cap in place, apart from the fact that it's legislated? There is a rationale, I think, behind the legislation. Given that rates are a tax on wealth, taxes can either be regressive or progressive. So a regressive tax is more fixed charges, so everybody pays the same regardless of the property that they're on. And fixed charges don't take into account the value of the property, it's just that there's a property. Rate in the dollar, which is the other side of it, so that's your general rate, that is a more progressive rate. So the higher your value, the more you will pay. Much like PAYE now, they have it staged so that you hit certain levels of income, you pay more tax. There would be a temptation, I guess, and I've heard other councils talk about this, that they would like to levy more fixed charges. Federated Farmers submitted on more fixed charges because it benefits the larger value properties. It tends to move the incidence of rates to the lower values. And it would also eliminate the argument about the use of the service, because if everybody was paying the same amount, it didn't matter whether you used it or not, it was just a fixed charge. However, if you did that, rates would be significantly higher for low value properties. And I did a bit of a calculation that if we put all of the general rate into a UAGC, that rate would be $1,063. Currently, we're sitting at 183. So it's a significant amount more for the lower values. And in terms of the sample property, we take the residential property there, they would be paying, if you could put everything in as a fixed charge, they would be paying $4,607, rather than what we've kind of got in there at $4,546. I'm excluding water volumetric charging out of that. So it's a 14% increase on the previous year. So it does have it works out that it pulls rates from big end of town in terms of their values and spreads it to the smaller end of town. So everybody is paying the same. So a $23 million bump we still pay $1,063, same as an urban ratepayer within the Alexandra town boundary, something like that. Commercial example, we're reduced by $1,106 based on that. So you can kind of see how that plays out. So limiting the fixed charges spreads the rates burden, and I think that was the intention of Parliament when they set that. The other thing we want to talk about today, two parts to the thing. We've got to set the uniform charges so that we can go and get the rates set and then provide a rates resolution for you. But there's also complying with the UAGC, and that's got two parts to it as well. You've got the current one, which sits at 30.03. So that's in breach of the 30% cap. And then in 2 years' time, you will end up, once Three Waters move away, the UAGC as a proportion of total rates, or the projected fixed charges as a proportion of total rates, will move to 42.55. That's based on this year's numbers. I haven't looked at going out 3 years and calculating it there. Probably will be a little bit worse with the increases that are going through. So you've got a problem this year, and you've got a problem in 2 years' time. Now, the 2 years' time one you can leave if you want to, but it will need to be addressed in 2 years' time. And that means that there is a bigger impact by switching from fixed to variable charges on ratepayers than it would be if you smooth that out over the next 2 or 3 years. It kind of comes back to the volumetric charging. We've had it for 60 cents so long, and we have had to have such a significant increase to, we were going for $2.40, we've come back to $1.60. $1.60 is still a large increase compared to 60 cents. So we've got a couple of years to address the issue around the 30% cap. I've also, and that's in that kind of table, the little table at the bottom with the four cells. So you'll see 30.03, 42.55. Our average rates rise at the moment is 12.46, and it was 13.01. The 13.01 is in there for information. The 12.46 obviously won't change because that's the average rates rise. What we're actually doing is mixing and matching fixed versus variable. So we're still going to collect the total. It's just how we collect within that total. There are two major levers that you can pull. I have specifically excluded changing the library rate. That is a fixed charge. That's been a fixed charge that was not talked about as going as a variable charge. It's $150 or something like that. It's not a great deal of money, but we could look at that if you wanted to. And I haven't looked at the stormwater charge, which is across the district as well. That's $10. The reason we set $10 across the district for stormwater is when Three Waters eventually leaves, it will be easier for the new entity to build on a fixed charge rather than have to have all of the capital value information that we used to charge that way. So I've excluded that because I'm not seeing a rate. It kind of goes contrary to why we put it in as a fixed charge.
Stormwater include roads?
Stormwater, well, that would depend. There is a dividing part between roading, which stays as roads, and stormwater, which is part of the stormwater network.
Yeah, pretty good. When we did that change to the waters, the stormwater network largely picks up roading and stormwater. And I'm pretty sure that the roading budget contributes to that stormwater. If it doesn't, it's supposed to.
The stormwater budget is relatively small. It's $300,000-400,000. That's the one we've dealt with. If anything else is sitting in roading, that stays in roading. We haven't touched that.
Because the stormwater is not going to local waters.
It is.
It is.
It is.
It is all three. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
So where we have.
So why won't that stormwater one go then too?
It will,
Ah,
to local water done well.
Okay,
What I'm actually
just
saying is, it just makes the administration and the billing
Yep.
for the new entity easier, because they will just bill everybody $10, rather than have to calculate based on the property value of the, which is how we used to collect stormwater, which is part of the, public. It was collected along the same lines as the public toilets as well. We pulled all that out. And again, it's contrary to what we were talking about, so I haven't included the discussion around that. So really, we're left with two, which is general rate and the community facilities rate. And the community facilities rate is almost as much as the general rate, and that is a result of districtizing the various activities that obviously went through in September last year. This is the impact of it now. We are talking, these numbers are inclusive of GST as well. We're talking $14.5 million for all of the community facilities, that's swimming pools, parks, reserves, those types of things. The UAGC will fund things like, UAGC funds roading. Yeah. Elected members' expenses, those types of things, so planning regulatory. So, yeah, they're the two levers that you have the ability to adjust. So currently we budgeted for 100% fixed charge for the community facilities rate. And 17.1%. I don't ask me why it's 17.21, but it just came out at 183 with what we went and consolidated. So we can now start changing stuff. So if I, for argument's sake, so if you look at the sheet across the top there, you've got 6 samples, super samples, if you like. It's got its capital value, its land value, the number of water connections. Let's just move that up a little bit, because that has.
You make it bigger, please.
Right.
Yeah, I'll borrow your glasses, Nigel. That'd be smart, eh?
How's that?
Yeah,
The line is out.
Now,
Might be the next discussion. I've
now
got
it
here.
has holes bigger. Oh, no, you see now, sisters.
undo. Quickly.
There we go. Right, so if you look across the top, the said you've got capital value, land value, number of water connections, because that's important. We're calculating water in here at $1.60. The units used for those samples. We've got the previous year's rates, the previous year's water charges at 60 cents, and the total bill that people will pay. So that is the previous year. Then we've got the deliberation. So this is after the deliberation. So the rates for the various samples, the water charges for those samples, and the total. Then I've talked about an after deliberation change from the CD. So that kind of gives you an idea of the increase and or decreases. There are some decreases. And the percentage change from the CD. And then the overall change from the previous year. The rates only increase because if you're trying to compare the move or the impact of the changes that we're going to be making on the activity, well, you see that X water. And then this is the overall increase from the previous year, including water. Okay. So
We might be being picky, but your example of residential ones really low end, capital value.
I want to buy that.
Yeah, I want to buy that
I'll
house
be
too.
in Logan.
Eh?
I'll be in Logan.
Oh, no, I'm
You
not
wouldn't
talking about
mind
low, but I thought, well, 680,000. Yeah, it's just,
yeah, I guess why we chose those because it does represent the lower end of town, because you want to see the impact of this on a lower value property, and you go through the higher values are obviously in the commercial
Terrace
space.
House Reeve, just sold the over 800,000.
yeah,
Whereabouts is that?
it's not a problem.
Okay. Yeah. So if we now look at changing our numbers, so the important ones are across here. 30.03 and 42.55. So if we turn around and we said, well, let's make it 90% fixed charge, 10% variable charge. You can see that drops us below our 30% cap quite nicely, as you'd expect. You've got more variable charges coming in, less fixed charges. It drops our projected 3-year position down below 42, but it's probably not enough because you have to do this again next year, and it will need to be potentially a bigger jump. But if you look at the rates increases, I've made it, if it's above the average 12.46, it shows up as red. So in terms of the rates increases for a commercial property, which is the top one, hasn't moved a lot. It was about, I think it was about 9 or something like that. Farm's not moved a lot. The lifestyle block is probably tipped over a little bit, but the others are still below the average of 12.46. So we've achieved, by doing that, we've achieved one goal, which is to get this thing under 30%.
What are you going to rate the other 10% on land or capital value?
Capital value, and the reason capital value is because most of the pre-districtised activities were ward-funded capital value. So what we've done is we've lumped them all in as capital value. So it's kind of a similar like-for-like type of thing. The problem with that, there is a problem with it, is that depending on the level of expenditure in a ward at the time, so if it was lower, take Maniototo or Teviot, may have had lower expenditure, they are now picking up the expenditure from Cromwell and Vincent.
Just balances out what they've already been getting paid from that end with their roading and other stuff anyway, so it's a bit of a money go around.
Yeah.
The issue that I have a little bit, and you made the observation before that rates are a tax on the wealth, and I'm going, well, I don't agree with that one little bit, especially when it's stuff where we're getting the same level of service, so the logic says you should pay the same amount.
Yeah.
And so what the problem for us has always been is the high land values in the farming sector in particular. So the tendency is, so let's go to capital value and use that. But I think you're better off to say, well, if you take a community, most of the land values in a residential, the urban areas, the biggest number of units we've got are generally the same. Doesn't vary that much. Capital value may vary a whole lot, but the land value sits at whatever it is, and pretty well doesn't change.
Yeah.
And so what I'd, and you were going to say, no, it's too complicated, but I would have thought we'd be better looking at a situation that used land value rating and threw a differential in for the high value land value of farms to try and even that back out.
Yes, you're right, it's too complicated. It is.
Thanks for your-
But
Yeah, but it's logical, isn't it?
there are, I mean,
That would make me feel better. Thank you.
given the time,
Yes.
and I actually think that, because that all gets tied into revenue and financing costs and revenue differentials. Given that we're gonna, what I call the reset in 2 years' time. It would be absolutely worth
Looking
having
at
a
that
look
then,
at that at that time.
and you've got new land values in as well, which are going to be far more relevant to what we've got currently.
Don't disagree with you, and look, although having said that, the majority of councils in New Zealand are based on capital value. We'd be one of the outliers in terms of land value and capital value usage, but that's not to say that it's not wrong.
No, I don't think you've got to look at the differences and say, well, only because the price of rural land, which is most of our district, has gone stupid.
Yes.
Because the capital values are high, and the farmers are going, woe is me, it's not my fault that my farm's worth so much.
No, because a lot of that's been driven by the land use change.
Yes, by the farming community.
Well, you
And-
take cherries, you'll take gold mines, you'll take airports, you take
Yeah.
subdivisions. It's not all all relevant to it's driven by other land use changes. Urbanisation as much as anything. Vineyards.
Sorry, I Neil's comment about, we're not here to have a progressive tax system. And the problem with, and I know we sort of obey the legislation, but if you start loading taxes onto either land or capital to the more farms, the more expensive, properties. You load it on, you load it onto an asset base, so, all progressive taxation is taxed on income. And you're not taxing income, you're taxing an asset. That's why people get in trouble when they get big rates and they haven't got the cash flow to accommodate it. And I'm not really arguing against your suggested solutions, because to meet the legislation, that's what we're going to have to do. But somebody needs to really be, as I think I said in the last meeting, I think this is a really important it's a fundamental issue of how you see local government, really. And I see local government as if you provide a service, then everyone pays for that service. Equally, I mean, we're not here to distribute wealth as a national government.
But you are when you put on capital value.
So,
But you are when you put.
yeah, and I do like Neil's suggestion that you have a differential for more expensive landholdings, because that's the only way you can mitigate the unfairness of it, really.
I think Paul's right. It's not today and this year is not the chance to do that. And for all these years, fed farmers have been nothing but consistent. You know, and the perception that because you have more in capital and asset value, you can afford to pay more. And I think most of us would actually, when you stop and work that through, no, that's not entirely true. You might be asset rich, but very cash poor. But I think, when Three Waters goes, this whole thing about UAGCs is going to will come to, I think, far more closer looking at it by central government and say, well, actually, how relevant is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, local government is one of the, there's only two entities within New Zealand who can effectively demand money. And if you don't pay it, we will take it. Central government is one, and all of their ancillary activities, and local government is the other one. So we have a statutory right to levy rates. And that's why I say it is effectively a tax.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. And the way that they've structured this, it is actually a tax on wealth if you look at the 30% cap, as well as the fact that then it goes on to either land value or capital value. And people with higher land values, rural, commercial activities will pay more, because that's the way the government have set it up. I'm not making the comment that it is right or wrong, it's just that we've got to work within that framework. And if you wanted to, you could leave it at that, because this year you would comply at 27.81%. The problem you're going to have in 2 years' time is it's not going to be 27.81, it's going to be 39.39 based on these estimates. And then you have to make a bigger adjustment then. Now, the question that you really want to think about is, do we want to do that? In which case we move more of the rate into variable position, or do you want to deal with that in 2 years' time? So that's a question.
How much does it have to move? So that we can all be thinking about it. How much would it have to move to start changing that 39?
I might just make this a wee bit smaller to start with, so you can see the whole thing. So I apologise for that. So I can model it. So if we move this to 50/50, rather than say 50/50 would solve your problem right now, and we get it into next 3 years, we get it into 26.77. The problem there is that your large farm has just gone from 9% to 13% to 33%.
That's not, you can't bring it down.
And that's the trade-off that you've got to kind of make, because what I'm saying is that you will have to face this at some stage, and it's, that type of thing will play out in 2 years' time.
So my logic says that I think we should focus on this year, because next year we've got to change with land values and capital values, with revaluation coming out.
Yep.
And that every time that happens every 3 years just causes mayhem. It just changes our whole rating basis to who gets the most. And every 3 years, one 3-year cycle, the rural get hit, the next 3 years it's the urban, and it just keeps on repeating itself. I think at the moment, we're just shooting darts into the future and knowing something's gonna change next year. My logic would say, we know that's out there, there's a lot of things gotta line up for it to happen. And one is, first of all, the Three Waters change has got to go through and all those sort of things as well, that's part of it. My logic would say is that you take what you can get this year to get it below your 30. And then you say, let's see next year when you've got more time outside of an LTP, before the next LTP, to say, well, what has the valuation changes done to us, and how much further down the path are we with the local water's done well, Southern Water, whatever it is, to see what's going to line up. And I think we're in a better place to do it. Otherwise, you're going to do something to those people there that they get it again next time.
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
I guess though, the logic is right, what you've said is right, but if they're gonna get it again next time, when you actually correct this, they're gonna get it next time and they're gonna get on top of that, so.
That's 3 years
I
cycle.
do take your point,
Yeah.
I do take the point, and what, is a great way to change these things, is that, oh, that's QV, it's not us.
No, it's
You
not,
know,
it's not,
and
it's not, it's not cute. No, it's not about that, because it's not them, it's just the reality.
well, yeah, I know, but at the end of the day, as the council, you're taking what you've given in terms of valuation changes. You have no input into that. So that there is a part of the increase that would not be your responsibility.
It's regardless of what it still is. We were,
80-20 look like.
Just pointing out that, 50-50, so I moved it to 30. So for a 20%, drop in the variable and a 20% increase in the fixed, that impacted the farm, about 12%. Just, it brought it down 12. So if we went to 80, we're down at 15 for the farm. Now, the motels and the hotel, their major influence is going to be, if you leave it at 100%, their major influence is water, because they've got a lot of usage.
Other than the rural hotels.
Where they're not connected to a water scheme, absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
Nigel.
Yeah. I'd like to agree with Peter. An awful lot will change in 2 years, and you pointed out land valuations, but there could be other changes, political or whatever, that we don't know about, and I would argue if you deal with what we have to deal with today and leave tomorrow to tomorrow. And the other reason I would argue in support of doing that is that because you'll have the projected rate rises in 2 years' time at a lot lower level than they are at the moment. So if you're talking about redistributing who's going to get hit, then you're doing it with a much smaller rate rise than you do than we're dealing with at the moment. So the potential size of the impact will be. Yeah,
But if you think that through, the people who will get hit in terms of, that's a crass term, I think, who will pay more will be the rural space, because they won't get the benefit of the reduction in the Three Waters rates. Okay, so when the 29% reduction that we show in the financial strategy mainly impacts the urban area, because the waters is gone. So the rural space will still remain at the values, but they will then have a higher
I
proportion.
understand.
Okay.
But there is no reduction in waters because the consumer will be paying.
Yeah.
The water,
Not for us.
not for us.
Talking about specifically for us.
There's no savings.
but I think the rural people just have to realise it's saying, well, you can't just look at the rates that we're paying, because it's the rates plus our water. And they always say, well, ours is plus our water as well, because we've always been doing it, so well, nothing will change with that. I think the key thing about that to me is that at least it gives the rural one a chance to see what they've got, and more importantly, it probably, your 80-20 has seemed to, as you said, has hit the hotel motel stuff, whereas your 90-10 didn't seem to have such a big difference, did it? I didn't think.
The other one we haven't manipulated is the land value one, so we can do that as well.
So unless you're picking up growth, right?
But it's only for.
Growth is part of this. So land values,
What we're talking about here
is it,
is specific, well, when we calculate the rating factors, it's done on the values that we have and we know right now. So if anything comes along between now and June, then that will be taken into account and that will adjust it slightly.
But what I guess,
It's not going to have as much impact. In fact, it might go the other way, because if we get 20 sections and the value of the land that was before it was subdivided is not necessarily as high as, well, won't be as high as the new ones created, but it's not going to be significantly higher potentially. You're still going to have 20 new rating units that you're going to charge a UAGC on, or a community facilities charge on. That will reduce it slightly, but you'll have potentially more. Because if you set the rates now, and then we do the work to get all of the new things in, and they might happen after you've adopted your LTP, but before we strike the rates, potentially that's going to impact you 30%, because you're going to have more fixed charges paying the fixed charge that you set here, which will potentially push that up. And that's why I said last time that I think we need a little bit of a buffer between from the 30%. So it might be kind of 28% is the target you might want to aim for, but you don't want to leave it at 29.7 or something like that, because that's way too close.
Cheryl.
Yeah, I just had a question. I'm presuming this is across the board, all the councils are going to be experiencing this
Yep.
as well, okay? And so surely, if this is a problem that all the councils have got, the government's also going to be aware of this, but they're going to take this to LGNZ conference as well and make this them aware of it. I'd be really, yeah, because at the end of that, if everybody's experiencing this, then the government's got to step in and actually change how this is done. They've got to change that 30%.
well,
So in 2 years' time, I'm just going to say, if we left it as it is now, in 2 years' time, we don't know what the government is going to do, because the whole country is going to be experiencing this. They're going to have to step in and do something.
But not all councils do uniform annual general charges. So the council I came from didn't do.
Capital.
Yeah, so it's, and there's a graph that's produced every year where you see the list of all 67 councils. This council would be probably at the top end of that, and it would go all the way down to the bottom where some don't do it. So councils choose to do it this way, or some of it this way, or not at all this way.
And probably in the cities, it's in more urbanised areas.
It's all
It's probably
capital
easier to go capital
it's all
gains
capital
because it evens itself out, because as Paul says, it's effectively a tax on wealth. So the business community are deemed to have to pay more because their assets are worth more. But you don't have the outliers that we get, which are there and go right up to the 20s and 30s. And then don't forget this, we've got some large dams in this outfit, and many years ago, we addressed that, because if we made them pay the full rates based on what we're currently thinking, we'd all get a big decrease. It'd be quite good.
But you pay for it in the house.
But in answer to your question, Cheryl, they may actually turn around and say, we like the 30% rule, but we're going to give you more time to get down to it and comply with it. So that could be, and they could actually do something like I'm suggesting now, and stage it over 2 or 3 years. And so you end up by 2030 that you're back down to the 30%.
Give you a bit of leeway so that you could go over the 30,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
get that back to.
Yeah. But the problem is, yes, we are guessing, and we comply with the legislation, we're talking about the legislation that's currently in place. But you're correct, they may intervene and say, this
you
is
just
not
need to move the temperature.
working, but, you know, the other councils, we don't charge UAGCs, we charge very low UAGCs. So the impact on them is not as high. And they don't have to do anything, we kind of take the approach that we want people to the fixed charges at a higher level. Because we want, effectively, we want everybody to contribute at a certain level. It doesn't matter what the value is. And that does help the high value properties. And that's what we've introduced here. Doesn't necessarily work for properties that are lower value. So, yeah.
But there aren't many, it's only the outlying regions that have those, including Roxburgh.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll go back to the point on growth. If we've got 600 coming down the pipe, well, you will one day. We were talking about 3 years out.
You take that into account when you do it.
Yeah.
The reason I brought this up is because I was conscious of the conversation that you had around your volumetric charging discussions at the deliberations meeting in terms of not necessarily addressing the issue of increasing volumetric charging in small increments.
Digging a hole, digging a hole.
Yeah. So, there's no legal reason why you need to do anything about it today or even next year. That it will come home depending on what happens with government and what happens when Three Waters goes. But there will be something that we need to consider in 2 years' time. So I'll just do a little bit of I'll put this back up to 100. And then we'll change the UAGC on the general rate. So this would have to go down. There's not a lot more of room to move here because it's at 17%. So if we went down to something like 10, that's the change that you would see on the various properties. So you can see, because it's land value, the impact on the larger farms and the commercial activities are very much minimalised. The problems still sit in the motels. The residential's taken a bit of a hike, and the hotel space is still roughly where 33, 36%. So that impact is due to effectively the volumetric charging, that you can't get away from that. So those are it does impact capital value more if you play around with the community facilities rate, and that will impact the sort of the rural areas more than it will impact the urban areas.
So if you take your motel, and while there was talk way back when that you had a bed tax, if you worked on that methodology there, you're picking up the motel industry as a tax to offset rates rather than a tax to be taken in. So
We're not
if
gonna get a
you
big tax to
had,
offset rates.
pardon?
We're not gonna get these tax to offset rates.
No, but I guess what I'm saying, if you use that methodology there, A, majority of those cost structures run into the residential. B, the residential is going to grow at a faster rate than ever before. C, the motel, if it is picked up in a minute change, I can't read 8.7 from where it was.
Sorry.
That actually, if it's, I guess the word of it would be, it's found, potentially found money in the motel system, because if you have a bed tax.
So the bed tax comes from a tourist. The motel like this, the tax comes from the motel.
I agree, but it can be recouped by.
That's not an equivalent at all.
Well, I think that's pretty out there at the moment because one of the government parties has put flick on. So I don't think we should be here.
There's no-
No, I guess what I'm saying,
We have to control what we can
if that
control.
methodology worked and the motel picked up a wee more, yes, I agree with Nigel.
Well, I can't help it.
All I'm saying, it's an area where you can pick up the average it out. I mean, the residential has that, most of that cost, we've seen that. It's going,
So I guess in terms of, because we do have some money in the budget to look at tourism rates and charging a different way. Depending on what you're collecting the bed tax for.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that a bed tax would be linked pretty intrinsically with tourism. Because you'd be levying it on Airbnbs and motels and tourist accommodation. So what you're then doing is you're collecting that money for a tourist activity. So you've got to also remember that what you rate for, I mean, when we're talking community facilities rate, it is specifically rated for things like swimming pools and parks and the likes, and that's all you can use it for. Bed tax would be a similar thing. So rating for bed tax would only alleviate the problem around, if you linked it to tourism, the cost associated with delivering tourism activity. If you were going to increase the tourism activity and spend more in there, then that's fine, that's what you would levy your bed tax on. But effectively, if you levy a bed tax or a tourism accommodation tax or whatever, however you wanted to put it, that would have to be used for that space, and that might not solve your hotel problem, because they're still contributing to community facilities, it's contributing to roading through the general rate, they're contributing to all of those things. What impacts them is their value, but you can see here that a lot of their increase, their rates only increase is 10%. Where they get really, I've done that again because I made it bigger, sorry guys. Where they get hit is in the water space. And we talked about that, and the conversation was, well, they use it, they should pay it. So it's not necessarily going to solve the problem by putting that type of rate in. Because
No, I guess what I'm saying is if it picks up because of usage of water, it picks up what you just said, if you put your 10% there. It picks up the motel.
Yep.
Who are high water users, who are users of salt, who are effectively, because agriculture does,
no, that's right, yeah.
but it picks that up. So it's the right, I guess what I'm trying to say, it's probably the right place for it to fall. Because it uses the reason by nature is they're here for the facilities, they're here for the landscape, they're here for the tourism, they're here for the motorsport park, they're here for events. So, and they are using a lot of water, they do use a lot of everything as an infrastructure.
The other thing I will throw in the mix, and don't shoot the messengers, but I'm going to throw it in anyway. Commercial operations have an advantage that urban people don't. Commercial operations can claim GST, so they're already 15% that they can claim back. And tax deduction of the rates in a commercial operation is allowed where it's not allowed in an urban space. So given the tax rate 28%, potentially you could very crudely, if you wanted to, increase things like commercial and the farms and the motels and the residential through the use of moving these fixed charges around, and create a very crude differential that reflects their ability that nobody else has. That's just something to think about, to make it easier. Some councils don't even think about that, but there is an advantage that a commercial operation has over an urban, a non-commercial operation.
So that commercial operation, be saying is part enough as it is.
I'm not
Because
arguing
they pay tax twice.
well, they can claim the GST back for a start. So whatever their income is and whatever they've paid, they're going to get that back as a cash offset potentially. And it's the same with the tax deduction. It might not be cash in the hand. I can give you that, but it could be a reduction in the amount of tax that they have to pay.
It's like paper, to sell it in practice.
Oh, yeah,
It's worth noting, because it is something that impacts some of our high users, is that there is the ability for them to offset that through a variety of mechanisms. Is that our place to play or not? I don't know. We made that decision yet, but there are some massive implications for some of our residential owners. And when you pull it up, when we're talking about capital value and versus the fixed rate, in 2015, so in the last 10 years, our average capital value has gone from 280,000 to 731,000. So if you've owned a house for the last 10 years, you've gone from 280 to 731, but that increase in value can only be captured if you sell your house. And we're reaching that end of the golden assumption. People can't afford to live on the pension. We're caught in this, sort of quagmire in the middle whereby we've got a large percentage of our population who don't have additional supplementary income or don't have the ability to supplement their income, but these increasing rates and charges and everything else are coming at them. We're going to have to start thinking about the stuff, and it's all well and good to say we're going to leave it for 2 years because our, land values might change. We're all getting a new QV in the next 12 months. You know, water will go. There's always going to be reasons for us to not do anything and to just wait and see. And at some point, we are going to have our hands forced and we will not be able to wait and see.
So you're saying since 2020, they've pretty much gone up $400,000.
I think the other thing in relation to that is you've got to be careful to not talk about dollars. What you need to be thinking about is percentages, because an increase in valuation from our perspective doesn't mean we're going to get any more rates. What it actually means is that different areas are going to pay different levels depending on how the rate, the valuation changes. So if you have and I experienced this in another case, an area went up 238% in one valuation cycle. Whereas the rest of the district average increase was 71%. So there was a lot, even though the council weren't collecting any more rates, the incidence of rates shifted from, you know, and 71% is nothing we sniffed at over 3 years. Went from the group that was at 71% moved to the ratepayers who were paying 238%. We've got a 238% increase. So it will increase individuals, but it won't increase the total council take. So I think that was, because sometimes you hear that argument when valuations are coming on, I'm going to pay more rates, council's going to get more money. We're not getting more money. You might pay more rates, but it's because of that.
What's the breakdown, and are there any other higher growth councils around New Zealand who are doing it differently from us that we could be learning from? What does it look like in Tauranga or QLDC or Hamilton, where they do have these hugely fluctuating or in one direction increases in capital value every 3 years?
I can speak, it was a regional council, not necessarily one of the ones you've mentioned, but what they used to do was move more to a user pays type. So they moved away from rates to a billing type scenario. So they had a very low general rate, but we're collecting most of their money from, and they get the ability to do that through, you know, monitoring your stormwater. So they charge you $25 per time, that type of thing, and you have to pay that. The problem we've got, and every council in New Zealand is constrained by the Rating Act and this 30% thing. What we've actually got, we could get out of this if we, and we can't do it now because we haven't got solar on, but if we turn around like we do for the solid waste rate, we've said, if you use the bins, you pay X. If you don't use the bins, you've got to contribute Y. They're different levels, even though everybody's going to pay towards solid waste. It's not a uniform charge because someone's paying for the service and someone's paying for everybody else is paying for the waste minimisation. So that type of thing can be done. Then it gets kind of complicated as to the rationale behind why we did it. If we went down the districtisation route and we said everybody's going to pay for swimming pools, it would be difficult now to understand the rationale why we're doing it differently. So there are ways that you can not deal with your 30% cap, but they become a little bit complicated. The other thing that you will find is some councils, Wellington City, for argument's sake, have a differential for their commercial space, and it's 6 times, I think, is it?
Yeah, I mean, on average, it's probably 3.7 in the valley.
Yeah,
Wellington was higher.
yeah. So they charge their CBD and they charge their because this came from I think Woolworths was. There was a case, a High Court case that Woolworths levied against the council for charging that, but the council got one there. The other thing you can look at is things like, which would impact, you still collect the same amount of money, but you might turn around and say, we are going to differentiate dairy farms, for argument's sake, because every one of those tankers is equivalent to 90 vehicle movements. If they're doing it once a day or twice a day, you know, that's the impact on the roading that everybody's currently paying for, but it's caused by, you have a cause and effect type of scenario going. So you could turn around and say, right, we are going to levy a differential on dairy farms or forestry, the same that Wairau did. And they just recently won the appeal. So that's, as long as you do it right, you can get those types of things through. And I think that those are the types of things we need to start looking at as part of that rates review. So I don't think it's just whether we switch from land value to capital value. It's more about, can we get a little bit more finesse with who pays what?
And that would all be done within the one rating envelope, you know, but
Yeah, absolutely. What you would do is, if it was a differential and you would decide, because you have differentials for your promotions and they're differentiated by ward, because each ward spends a little bit more than different levels of spending. So you do have that, but you have a differential, commercial operators pay more than farms, right? So, farms is less than, I think they're about 0.83 or something like that, whereas a commercial operator is in the something like, so they're paying almost 6 times more than a farm because they get the benefit. So you can do those types of things. We just haven't had enough time, and I think it needs to be looked at, because there are some things that you can do in terms of a rate. So if you were a commercial operator, you would have a rate line that me as a residential property owner wouldn't have.
so does that not argue that we should look at this year on its merits and spend some time investigating what was just been outlining for the view the next year?
That'd be my take. There's a whole lot of stuff out there that that needs to be looked at. The bigger picture stuff, the whole revenue and financing policy. You know, even though the differentials in place for the tourism rate, you know, those operators are still highly subsidised by, in fact, the urban residential people, because they've got high enough capital values, and they're some of the masses means that they will pay more, even with the as a group. So I just think what you've just told us, all those other things that are out there, says to me that even more so we should be looking at saying, do what we need to do this year. Yeah, next year, between now and next year, there's a ton of work to be done to work it through. And well, even next year's going to be difficult. Well, you know, we had the valuations out this year, so we'll know. So you'll know what you're dealing with, and we'll be closer down the track, and it'll be far more interesting.
I'm happy whatever the decision is. I just wanted to bring it to your attention so you did potentially get a big old bubble in 2 years' time that you have to deal with, and I think it makes sense, given that you want to undertake a rates review, that will change the picture.
So would it be possible to form a resolution there? Gets us to change it, you want it to bring back to 28% for this year.
I did 10.
All right.
So, I
We
mean,
need to do something for this year
Yeah.
to get it under that
Yeah.
30%. And then I guess it's that recognition from this council that there is a big bubble coming, and we have got a finite period of time to come up with the best way to address it.
So that's 90-10 you've got there now, did 100% fixed rate.
the 9010 is on the
UAGC.
general rate, so that's the UAGC, and that seems to have least impact on everybody. So we reduced the UAGC from $183 to 107. And that would be, if that was the way you're inclined, that would be the suggested.
The 90-10.
Yeah, I would just resolve that you set the UAGC at $107.
Oh,
Yeah, because that's how that works out. And you set the targeted fixed rate for the community facilities rate at $979, and you're quite specific about it. So those would be the two rates you would set, and then whatever else you wanted to add as the, I guess, the future, this is coming, we need to be thinking type of solution.
So based on the numbers that went out for the consultation on the Ready Rector, we had community facilities at 948,
Yes,
and we had UAGC at 183.
Yeah.
And it doesn't affect the general rate, because that's a land value rate, so it doesn't impact on that, but
all it means is that everybody's paying a uniform charge And the land value rate does increase slightly in terms of the, bigger value properties, but not by nearly as much. And it gets your UAGC down to 28.31.
Yeah.
It also has a little bit of a flow on effect for year 3, but we're not worrying about that yet.
And for some of those people who are seeing a decrease in the UAGC, a decrease, an increase in the community facilities, that means that actually they're getting a saving. It'll be picked up in the fact that the general rate will change slightly.
Yeah, so,
Yeah, for the land value part.
yeah. So effectively,
It should be neutral.
from an individual's perspective, if they're lower value property, their general rate in the dollar rate will increase by less
Yeah,
than a
yeah.
reduction in the UAGC. So they will see a benefit. The bigger end of town, your farmers, your commercial operators who have got a higher capital value and a higher land value will notice an $77 decrease in the UAGC. They may experience a $100 increase in the the land value.
Yeah. How did we do this before spreadsheets, Trevor Gowdy?
Well, and can't you?
You just guessed.
Trevor Gowdy, I'm gonna follow this.
So then the resolutions agree, adopts a uniform annual general charge of $107.
Yeah.
And adopts over the fixed community facilities rate, $979.
Yeah, Donna's just mentioned something that I'd forgotten in my report. If we do get more properties coming on, the $979 may adjust. So maybe the resolution is not necessarily 979, but you say it is community facilities rate is 100% funded from fixed charges, and whatever the fixed
Charge,
Yeah.
it comes out at, the 107 won't matter because it will flow the indifferent flowing rate.
But maybe we should do something in the comment that picks up the same based on the current numbers, it's
Yeah.
this,
So the top.
just so we know, because otherwise someone will say, well, how did you have no idea what the number was?
Then we will put a resolution right. Requests Paul to come back with a magic bullet for the 2022. What would you like to say? What would we like to say to really put the emphasis on this work to be pushed forward in the next 2 years? This, we've identified a problem, we know it's coming, we know the time frame it's coming. How much impetus are we going to put on the work to be done? In the meantime, recognising we've spent an hour talking about it and it's really just opened more questions than answers.
We plan to do a ratings review.
Yeah.
On our policy, which would incorporate all of that
Yeah.
in the next financial year.
And you could also say that this will form the fee work stream between the American payments.
Yeah.
Something like that would be embedded in the resolution as a and part of the Queensland American payments.
So would we say something along the lines of notes?
So note that this work will
Form a key work stream of the ratings.
be considered as part of the rating review, which forms a key work stream of the 2027.
That's right. Yeah. Sorry, did that.
Will it be the LTP or will it start with an AP? I will be the
It
LTP.
will be part of the rating review and form a key work stream for the 2027.
It has to be part of the LTP because all the revenue rights policies.
Part of the
got to
rating review.
be, publicly.
You've had a bit of discussion about it, right? A few ideas, yeah.
Well, it's just a change in terms.
Yep.
I'm gonna consult Perry.
Pull down.
You got to consult with Jerry Nichols. You put your face on the TV.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, here it is. Oh, no, it's not.
I think that it's-
Humility.
Yeah, cool.
Go, I conclude.
That's it.
Yeah.
But you should also go there. I don't know, church.
Oh, no, it's just Sarah's just.
Oh, seriously? Oh.
So that she can put the resolutions up so we can see them.
So, you know, do Jesus church, do not seek to know can you consider?
it's a little-
Have you considered?
Yeah, another one's best parent, other than race, it's this. But that's not like the New Zealand, don't they? So we like to change it. That doesn't actually change. It's all people there, so like. Yeah. Funding.
Right.
There's a couple of changes that we need to make. The 25-26 rating year, not long-term planning, we're only talking about year one.
Oh, yeah. So I did put year one to start with, but do you want to put it?
So 2025,
You know,
26 rating year.
Yep.
And then the second one will be 100% dollars.
Caution.
100% of the total requirement for community facilities, activities.
There's 43 million sits out in front of this. And
For the 2025-26 rating. Is that right? Yeah.
So what is the word this refer to indeed?
Yeah, we'll just put it on them. Well, we put fixed rate.
What you've been talking about is actually a wider review. And I think that maybe notes that, a wide, not wide ranging,
Widely.
comprehensive rating review.
Isn't it just revenue and finance and policy? Because it all starts there.
Well, that's all part of it,
Yeah, so just use that. That covers everything.
We're going to take off the revenue and finance.
I'm sorry.
Will be undertaken, yeah.
Yeah.
And will form a key part, which we will be in confidence of everything.
You're right. Old, tired, you know.
What's the catch?
Jeez.
Anything good?
Taken,
Still.
so it'll leave that as
Extra
part
group meeting.
undertaken as part of the rating and finance.
Take to the paper.
And will form part, yeah.
Rating and review policy and.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so receives the report, fix the level of significance, adopts a uniform annual general charge of $107, the 2025-26 rating year, adopts a targeted fixed community facilities rate of 100% of the total requirement for community facilities activities for the 2025-26 rating year. Notes a comprehensive rating review will be undertaken as part of the revenue and finance policy and will form a key work stream for the 2027-37 terms of plan. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm happy to move that. So we have a second it from Nigel. All those in favour? Against? Carried. And everybody will have to go away and do homework. I'm not the best.
Great idea.
Bloody
Great.
spreadsheet.
Good luck with that.
And finding, yeah, it'd be nice if somebody had a wonderful idea between now and then that was going to solve our challenges.
Thank you everyone. Bring us joy.
Thanks, big famous, absolutely.
You don't.
You live in the dream, don't you? And for those of us that work in offices.
Which, we're trying to get Tuesday, Tuesday, catch you.
Moving to status reports. Anybody got any comments to make? Comments? Questions?
Yeah, I had one. To find it. No, lost it. Where's it gone?
It's great that all, works were complete on the Constant Park Pines subdivision and only final walkover to be scheduled for sign. It's been a long time.
Predates me.
Yeah.
Predated
Our, report will get a bit smaller when you can wipe those pages off.
No questions on that one, then?
Yeah, I pushed the wrong button and went elsewhere. Come back, I'm just about there.
You know, that
Something to do with, freedom camping. Yeah,
Page
But
352.
352, yeah. It says there the matter's closed, but I thought we passed another resolution last meeting.
I guess because that one is freedom camping enforcement options.
Yep, yep.
And now we're looking at a parks and reserves bylaw.
But it's not there. The parks, I couldn't find the Parks and Reserves, resolution. That's what I was missing. No, I don't think so.
Well spotted.
Correct. Sure it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Showing potential.
You're right, yes, it should be.
Yeah, so yes, that's also, yeah. The comment's correct and it is closed because of a new one, but I couldn't find the new one.
We've just renamed it and reopened it. But it looks like we've made some progress because we closed it. Yeah.
On that basis, are you happy to
Yes,
note?
okay.
And I have just had, looking at the LGNZ remit that we talked about, the security systems payment that has been accepted for the AGM, so that'll be going to the, everybody in July. We'll see.
Stand up there and
So,
everybody to support
stand
it.
up there and see
Yeah.
if everybody wants to support it.
Yeah. And all, no, sorry.
Right, I'm happy that the status reports be received. Sally's happy to second that.
Right,
Those in
Oh.
favour? Sorry.
the old age.
Against, carried. Thank you. Community board committee minutes beginning on page 368. Anybody got anything to note through the minutes of the VCB? In that case, I'm happy to move them. Ian's happy to second those. Those in favour? Again. Carried. Date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 25th of June. And now for the reasons outlined on page 397, I'll move that we go into public excluded. Sarah will second that. Thank you. All those in favour? Against?